Going to argue about whether he's right. We've got the parties and the campaigns, we've got people here who'd like the job, plus the Mayor of Rome and the former Mayor of New York, and a bunch of people who think it's a thoroughly bad idea. First, though, here's what the Prime Minister had to say.
I want to talk tonight about my vision for London and how I believe having a directly elected mayor can help make London a city that we can really be proud of, a city that is economically prosperous, a city where we tackle crime and poverty properly, a city with a transport system that operates effectively and one that our citizens are proud to use. We have great strengths. Why, therefore, is it important that we alter the structure of government in London? The directly elected mayor for London and a small assembly working with the mayor is going to be a new departure for city government in Britain. I want to see the mayor be able to pull together those strengths and become, he or she, an important national and international figure. This is a post that is going to have power, real power. There is no question but that the mayor will have the capacity to change things for the better. Whether it's on transport or crime or jobs or the environment, the mayor will have the power to make a difference and will be expected by Londoners to do so. Just imagine a couple of years on that we have the opportunity to elect a mayor and assembly that are going to have real power to set out a real vision for Britain, for Britain's future and London's future within it, and able to say to the people of London that this is what you'll get if you vote for us. Local government really close to the people, a political figure able to wield real power in our capital city. Bring us into line with things that have happened the world over, but we've been denied year and year and year here in Britain. It's a great innovation. It's also the right innovation. We have taken the steps to give you the chance to make it happen. Use that chance.
Tony Blair's proposals are set out in a white paper and are pretty straightforward. The referendum will ask a simple question. Do you want an elected mayor and assembly for London? Vote yes, and all the main parties want you to vote yes, and you'll get an elected mayor with awesome powers. He or she will be able to appoint a cabinet, not all of whom will even need to have been elected. He or she will be able to appoint people to run bodies which could be in charge of transport, development and the Metropolitan Police. He or she won't have any tax-raising powers, but will control a £3.3 billion budget, and there'll be no limit to the number of terms they can serve. There will be a 25-member assembly too, but it won't be able to challenge the mayor's appointments. Critics say it'll be no more than a talking shop. The cost to the taxpayer of mayor and assembly will be £20 million a year. Well, monarchs are famously made by universal hallucination, and sometimes the campaign to get a mayor has looked a bit like that. But there is another side to the story. Here's Michael Crick with some cautionary tales.
London! We're up in our big debate. We hope that you won't be late. It's nearly election time. You have to make up your mind. The people we need a choice.
Excuse me, can we just tone down the noise a bit? We've heard all this noise about a London mayor.
Who's this geezer?
But can we just examine the arguments and see whether a mayor is really necessary?
London!
The history of the capital and of other British cities suggests a number of good reasons to vote no. The old Greater London Council closed in 1986 with a defiant farewell party, put to death by Mrs. Thatcher.
You're the reason she's abolishing the GLC, because you care enough to come and because you say it's your council.
She saw it as a bureaucratic waste of money, and Simon Randall, a leader of the No campaign, fears the proposed institutions would amount to a GLC Mark II and inevitably harm the 32 London boroughs.
I take a very firm view that a London mayor and a Greater London Assembly is going to be bad for Londoners. It is going to create conflict where it doesn't exist. It's going to duplicate. And I think what will happen is we'll see the old GLC coming back in the way it interfered with local decisions who are made by local politicians at London Town Hall level.
While London saw one revolt against the Thatcher government, the Marxist Derek Hatton led Liverpool Council in another.
These benches being absolutely chock-a-block with supporters and opponents all the
Now
time.
retired from politics, he welcomes mayors as giving big cities extra clout in those battles with Whitehall. Good news for Liverpool maybe, but not for ministers.
I, for the life of me, cannot understand why Tony Blair and Mandelson are actually supporting the ideas of elected mayors, because if I was them, the last thing I would want would be the personification of opposition in the different major cities in this country, being a thorn in their side. The last thing in the world I'd want, and I cannot for the life of me understand why they'll do it.
So we could see a whole series of Derek Hattons all over the country.
I certainly think that there's a danger that certain cities could elect people who could spend most of their time, because of the pressure from the grassroots, actually opposing the particular government in power. And if I was Tony Blair or Peter Mandelson, I wouldn't want to have anything to do with that.
Well, this is just part of the city's silverware collection that we have on
Liverpool's existing Lord Mayor, like its silverware, is largely ceremonial. This year's occupant, Margaret Clarke, fears elected mayors with real power would inevitably clash with their councils.
Who makes the policy? Who decides the direction? Who decides how money will it be expended? Who decides what it is the people of the city need? Is it one person or is it an elected body? I think there's something to be said for an elected body, because during the due process of consultation and debate, you can come to quite rational decisions. But I think there's something frightening to me about absolute infinite power, because after all, it's led to corruption in the past.
On Tyneside, as in Liverpool, history has already seen several corrupt council leaders. Is it such a good idea, then, to create a new and even more powerful office of elected mayor? Perhaps the nearest this country's ever come to having an American-style city boss was here in Newcastle in the 1960s. Just as the government envisages with its directly elected mayors, he was a man of great vision and ideas for Newcastle, who had the energy, the clout and the charisma to get things done. And yet he ended up with a 4-year jail sentence for corruption.
But Dan Smith doesn't see Newcastle as just another provincial town. To him, it's the capital of the north. And his
T. Dan Smith, they said, was decades ahead of his time, pushing through development plans to make Newcastle, believe it or not, into a Venice of the north, but brought down by personal greed. One of his successors, Jeremy Beecham, who led Newcastle for 17 years, fears elected mayors might find themselves as compromised as Smith was.
You're going to have to look around for where you get votes, how you fund a campaign, and the city of 250,000 people or more, that's going to be an expensive and time-consuming business. And I just have the feeling that you may be getting into the situation where you're beholden to those who supply the cash, or indeed beholden, perhaps in policy terms, to particularly vocal pressure groups, because you have nothing else to fall back on.
London! Polls suggest London will give an overwhelming yes vote next week. But could the capital be rushing into something its citizens may live to regret?
London!
Well, let's hear briefly now from the leaders of the two campaigns for and against. Simon Jenkins, why do you want to add another tier of bureaucracy to our government?
Well, we don't want to add a tier of bureaucracy. You've got a tier of bureaucracy there already. It's called the Government Office for London. What we want to do is we want to make it democratically responsible. London used to have the vote. We're being offered the vote back. When offered democracy back, it would be extraordinary if we didn't say yes.
Simon Fawthrop, what have you got against an elected mayor?
Well, it's basically, let's start generally by saying there's one thing we can agree on. London is a unique city. It's made up of very distinct communities. It's a city which has evolved, not a city which has been politically planned. And essentially we're opposing the government's proposals because what's on offer is a second-hand import of basically a political planning for our capital. This means we'll have higher council tax, more bureaucracy, less effective local government, which the Prime Minister talked about earlier. And London doesn't need a political beauty contest every 4 years. It actually needs more power for local communities, not less. Power which actually puts its communities first.
Right, let's hear briefly from the main political parties, because although you all sit together, you don't actually although you appear to, you don't actually have the same beliefs on this. Norman Fowler, you were part of the cabinet that abolished the GLC. You campaigned in the general election against the idea of a mayor. Have you no shame?
No. Thank you for putting it in that way, Jeremy. I think the position was that when I became Shadow Environment Secretary, we had lost an election. We recognized that. We lost it very heavily. I embarked upon a period of consultation, and I consulted with the Conservative group leaders throughout London. I consulted with my colleagues. And the result of that was that I came to the conclusion, and I put this to Shadow Cabinet, that what we wanted was a mayor. There was a good case and a strong case for a mayor, very separate from the case in Liverpool or Newcastle, but a case for a mayor. We didn't want a directly elected assembly. What we wanted was an assembly made up of the boroughs, borough leaders. And what we would have preferred to have, if I can make this last point, is two questions in the referendum: whether you were in favour of a mayor and whether you were in favour of an assembly. And on that, I'm backed.
Right. But just
on that, I'm backed by a whole range of people like Simon and indeed Ken Livingstone.
But just to be clear, the three of you are all saying vote yes, but you're really only saying vote half yes. If there had been a half possibility,
absolutely.
A year ago you were wrong.
We argued and argued in the House of Commons. It was defeated in the House of Lords. We would have liked two questions. We would have said yes to the mayor, but no to the directly elected assembly.
Simon Hughes, the fact of the matter is, although you're campaigning also for a yes vote, your party also doesn't believe in an elected mayor, does it?
We argued that London should have an elected government. We opposed the abolition of the GLC. But we would have preferred that the mayor came from the Assembly. The Prime Minister,
don't believe in a directly elected mayor?
It is not the best form of government. It unfortunately...
So why are you asking people to vote yes to it?
Because it's now, having gone through Parliament, and as Norman Fowler said, we argued the case, we won in the House of Lords, we got overturned in the House of Commons. It is now the only show in town, and it's better to have some elected government with directly elected mayor and assembly than no elected government.
And Nick Raynsford, isn't it the case that the London Labour Party is also against this idea of a directly elected mayor?
No, it's not. The London Labour Party at the last general election put forward candidates for every single constituency on a manifesto which pledged we would introduce a new citywide authority with a directly elected mayor. We believe in honouring our manifesto commitments, and that's what the party is going to do.
Well, we have some members of your own party who are not in favour of the idea. There's one of them sitting just down here. Would you like to tell us why you're against the idea of a directly elected mayor?
Well, first of all, I'm not speaking as representing the Borough Council. I'm speaking as a grassroots person in my party who Nick knows quite well.
But you are leader of Barking Council, aren't you?
I'm a leader of Barking Council, but I'm speaking personally from the grassroots of the party. And the grassroots of the party has made it clear, time and time again, we want an elected assembly, we want a representation from each of the boroughs, but we do not want a... nearly swallowed the word I was going to say, an egotistical so-and-so up there as a mayor dictating the kind of policies that he or she should be wanting on the borough.
Giles Brandreth, why is it, do you think, that your party has suddenly come so late to the party?
I suspect it's because they couldn't get what they wanted. The instinct of a Conservative is to want less bureaucracy, not more, to contain public expenditure, not to extend it, and to support grassroots democracy from, as it were, the bottom up, rather than imposing a new tier from the top down. Now, possibly, well, that's why I think people should still vote no, because if they vote no in sufficient number, we could then think again, and the sort of ideas that Norman said he really was still sympathetic to could be considered, even the sort of ideas that Simon said he was sympathetic to. So I'm saying vote no, because what we're being offered is something that's going to cost us £120 million in bureaucracy over 5 years. It's going to replace something where we already have 32 London boroughs, where there are already grassroots activists who could be used as the elected members. And it's going to give us a mayor that is simply going to be really a glorified photo opportunity extended week after week at public expense.
Norman Fowler, isn't the real reason you changed your mind because the Conservative Party couldn't bear the thought of losing another election?
No, I mean, what we did, as I said, was to actually take the advice of people working and living in London. I would have thought that that was actually what London would actually want. It's Giles as Member of Parliament, what used to be the Member of Parliament for Chester, I'm the Member of Parliament in a Birmingham constituency. What we were trying to do was to find out what London wanted. But what we also want, as far as this structure is concerned, and what concerns me about the directly elected assembly, is that unless we're careful, we're going to have layers of administration. We're going to have too many layers of administration. I'm in favour of the mayor. What worries me is having a directly elected assembly, a regional development agency, a government office for London, as you were mentioning in the in the film itself. But so we will keep our options open as far as the assembly is concerned, but as far as the big question is concerned, the mayor, we are in favour of it. But as I keep on repeating, we fought and fought for 2 questions. This government has got a majority of 180. If we can't have 2 questions, we've got 1 question, we've got to make a choice.
Nick Raynsford, why weren't you prepared to have the courage of your convictions and give 2 questions?
Very simply because there aren't 2 questions. If you want to range over the options, you have to have 5. The first question is, do you want a mayor on his or her own? The second one is, do you want an assembly on its own? The third is, do you want, as the government wants, a mayor and an assembly working together? The fourth is, do you want a mayor elected out of the assembly, which is what the Liberal Democrats want? And the fifth is, do you want a mayor with an assembly made up, not directly elected, but made up of the 32 London boroughs, which is what the Tories want? Now, those are the 5 options. It would have been immensely complicated. We believe that a number of those wouldn't have worked, and we felt it was right to present the option, because if you're going to have a mayor who has considerable powers, and that's been made very clear by the Prime Minister and by your film, it is right there has to be proper accountability, and the mayor and the assembly go together. They are an integral whole to ensure that the power is exercised within a proper framework of accountability. That is the option that we are presenting.
Simon Hughes, you would have preferred at least 2 questions, wouldn't you?
We argued very strongly. The Minister laid down a challenge to people in Parliament, produced 2 questions. Conservatives, ourselves and independents and some Labour peers voted for 2 questions. We agreed on them. There are 2 simple questions, Jeremy. Do you want an assembly, and do you want, for the first time ever in Britain, a novelty, a directly elected mayor? And people would be able very properly to judge that.
Right. Simon Hughes, you are credited, at least by your colleagues, with being the person who dreamed this up. Simon Jenkins, were you imagining that you would have a directly elected mayor and a directly elected assembly, or an assembly that the mayor would be accountable to? Would you imagine that we would have had 2 separate votes on the subject, or what?
I agree with Nick. I mean, I think it doesn't make any sense to say there should just be a single executive unaccountable to any assembly. There's no city in the world that doesn't have a mayor, and there's no city in the world that doesn't have a council. It is ridiculous to say that it's a talking shop. Parliament's a talking shop. The whole point of this exercise is to open up the processes of government in London to interrogation and, I think, discriminatory debate. And the purpose of this assembly is to allow people to go out there, to talk to each other, to debate, as indeed, to be fair, the GLC did. And my goodness, we missed that aspect of it. And to hold the mayor to account. That is not something you could do now. That is not something actually you could do when the GLC was there. This is a good system we're being offered. We shouldn't look it in the face.
We're going to explore some of the details of it in a second. But first, let's look at this question of whether having a directly elected mayor in London would be good for Britain. We're joined now from Rome by Francesco Rutelli, who's the mayor of Rome. Signor Rutelli, can you tell us, why do you think having a directly elected mayor is good for the country as a whole?
I think that Mr. Blair said it in a very clear way. I think it's a matter of confidence. It's not bureaucracy. People is able to make a choice and to choose a person who is responsible. It's completely the contrary of bureaucracy. And so it helps confidence in democracy and helps a mayor, directly elected mayor, to give the answer people want and to lead the competition among great cities in the world. That is the future, not only the present.
How has having a directly elected mayor in Rome changed the city there?
But this is a beautiful city, but as you can imagine, it is not Paradise Island. It's a complicated city. I think that when I was a candidate, 6 people in the previous city council were arrested. So my election was also a clean hands operation, and when I was elected, the city council were at the very, very low level, at the very last level in the public opinion confidence. Today, after 4 years, I've been re-elected, but after 4 years and a half, the city council is at the first level in all public opinion polls. It means that people knows there is somebody working hard for the city. Not all the problems are solved, but you have a responsibility, you have to deal with it, and the people is satisfied in having a person directly responsible with an elected assembly controlling and helping him.
Simon Fawthrop, when you hear that, it sounds a good idea.
Well, with respect to the Mayor of Rome, we have a saying, don't we, that when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And, you know, we're in London, and I wouldn't like to go to Rome and suggest that he has the far superior local boroughs that we have in London to run Rome. I prefer that to be here in London, and he shouldn't also interfere and say what is best for London.
I won't ask you for your opinion on the London borough system, Mr. Mayor. I'd be pleased to hear. But I
probably didn't know about it.
I'd be interested to know what you think of a system which ended up, as yours did, in a contest between a radical Green, yourself, and a neo-fascist.
The system is going to center-left, center-right competition, and my position is moderate Green, but as you can imagine, Rome is not a left-wing city. Rome is perhaps more a right-wing city, so if we won last election with more than 60%, it means that we spoke to all the people, and we were helped by this system, because the mayor speaks, talks directly with public opinion, acts every day with, I repeat, with many problems. Not all the problems are solved. Today the air pollution goes very much better in Rome. Tourism is going well. Public transport, not yet. We have a good result in culture, and people appreciate concrete results. I think this is the reason why they don't discuss about right or left, but more about programs.
Fine. Look, can I just ask you this? How long are you allowed to be mayor for?
How long have been mayor?
Now, how long
4 years.
Are you allowed to be mayor? How many terms can you have?
Two terms.
Two terms. Now, Simon Jenkins,
so in 3 years and a half, it's finished. It's over.
Great. Thank you. We'll Thank you. Now, when you look at the proposals for the Mayor of London, Simon Jenkins, there's no limit of 1 term or 2 terms or 3 terms or 4 terms. Somebody can get elected, can be there till they die.
Listen, I mean, if I may say so, both your film and your line of questioning is a sort of sneering at democracy, as if there's something mildly disreputable about local government.
Addressing the referendum.
Well, let me answer the question. And the film implied that there was an inherent tendency to corruption in local government. There is in all government. The question is, should it be accountable? The purpose of having an elected mayor is to hold him accountable, or her accountable, regularly. Not to have bureaucrats running it, potentially corrupt central government officials running it. In fact, local government all over the world tends to be more popular than central government, believe it or not, and it tends to be less corrupt than central government.
But you don't deny the basic proposition, which is that somebody is elected. They're not elected for 1 term or 2 terms, but they're elected indefinitely,
No,
potentially.
it's the same with the Prime Minister. Do you ask the Prime Minister that question?
Well, the Mayor of Rome is, the only comparable example we've got to hand, and he's a maximum limit of 2 terms. I mean, it is also true, is it not, that the Mayor of London, as proposed, will be able to appoint more or less anybody he liked. He'd appoint his grandmother to run a body in London if he chose to. And that person would not have to be elected.
The Mayor is elected. The Mayor is accountable for his or her actions. That is the right way to run a city.
To whom?
It is not accountable to the electorate, and in this case, to the Assembly.
So once we elect one of these guys, if the one of them throws their hat into the ring tonight, he can, for the next 5 years, he's absolutely free to do as he pleases, appoint who he likes to run the police, for example, And that's it. There's
No,
nothing...
that is not the case. The police appointment is subject to Home Secretary approval. But in general, yes. And what's wrong with it? You seem to be frightened of democracy. The whole point of this exercise is to let people vote.
But all right, Nick Raynsford, in general, is it not preferable that our lives are run by people who are elected rather than people who are appointed by somebody who was elected?
Well, that's precisely why we are restoring democratic election to London. The abolition of the GLC left London government in the hands of shadowy committees, quangos, joint boards, and indeed the Government Office for London, which is responsible to ministers but not directly to Londoners. We are restoring to Londoners the direct line of accountability. They will vote for the mayor, they will vote for the assembly, and yes, the mayor will make appointments. But those people will be accountable to the mayor, and the mayor's judgment on those appointments will ultimately be answerable to the electorate.
Right, let's look at one other area of power. Are you still with us, Mayor Rutelli?
Yes, I'm here.
Good.
I hope. I hope so.
I hope we get someone like you. Can you just help us? On your powers, do you have the power to raise any money for spending in Rome?
Yes, because in the last years we changed very much the institutional system, and local authorities had to raise funds and self-finance their activities. But I think it's one other question strictly linked with direct election, because I couldn't ask to people to raise up money, funds, if they don't agree. So there is a balance. That's democracy, I think. I know that you have a strong discussion about local powers, possibility of fundraising, taxations, and so on. I think it will arrive with a democratic discussion.
Right.
When time will be ready, it will be possible. But it's linked to consensus of public opinion. For me, it's okay, because people know that I have to be not so, come si dice, sparkly,
okay.
Risparmiare.
Mayor, thank you very much for joining us. Now, Steve Norris, I don't know, have you formally thrown your hat in the ring yet for mayor?
No, I haven't got a hat, as it happens.
Well, if you had a hat, would you throw it in the ring?
No, not as yet. No, I'm one of those...
You've thought about this a lot.
One of those many people who's thought about it, and I might say, bought the idea a long time ago, having had a lot of personal experience of just how beneficial a strong mayor model in London could be, no question.
You heard the Mayor of Rome saying that he has the power to raise money for local spending. Does it make sense to have a mayor in London who doesn't have similar powers?
Well, certainly I think the greatest myth we've heard tonight is this idea that the mayor controls this great budget of 3.3 billion. He may be, or she be, notionally in charge of it, but the reality is that every single penny of it is already spent, and the cryingly obvious need is that there should be more. So a mayor without any power to raise resources is a mayor, in my view, fundamentally disabled. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean new taxes. It means, for example, in relation to the underground, being able to go further than perhaps Mr. Prescott seems willing to do in terms of privatization. There are all sorts of issues like that that can raise funds, and there are real constraints there, incidentally, on how well the mayor can actually operate. That worries me. I think we're going three-quarters of the way very creditably, but there is a danger that the expectation will not actually be capable of being fulfilled unless there are resources there.
Nick Raynsford, the accusation is then that, I was going to say it was a dog's breakfast, but you kind of castrated the dog, really. That you propose to create this person, but you won't will them the means.
I wouldn't possibly dream of doing anything as cruel as you suggested. We are proposing a mayor with very considerable powers. The mayor will dispose of a budget initially of £3.3 billion, as your own programme identified at the start. There will be a single precept, so the mayor will be able to raise funds which will then be spent according to the mayor's decision, and there will be scope for additional arrangements through public-private partnerships of exactly the sort that the Deputy Prime Minister has recently announced for the Underground. So the suggestion that this is going to be a powerless mayor with a budget of £3.3 billion and a capacity to make an enormous difference to public transport and to many other services in London is very wide of the mark.
But isn't it the case, Robert Gordon Clarke, you speak for London First. Doesn't that title say it all?
It does. I mean, I think the business view now is that over the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of effective partnerships, but not a lot of action in London. A lot of businesses now are getting frustrated. They want to see a mayor with leadership and with the power to act for the capital. You gave a very good example of the Olympics earlier, the Prime Minister. We had a classic situation 5 years ago where we had two rival bids for London for the Olympics, neither of which worked, because we didn't have one person to pull everyone together and to get action. And I think that's what we want to see. And an elected mayor is becoming more and more popular amongst business. And I agree with Steve Norris as well. We need a mayor who has the power and the money, the resources to do things. And what we're not seeing at the moment is that power being seen.
Would that inevitably mean London subsidising the rest of the country effectively less?
Well, London, yes, exactly. One of the first issues for the mayor will be to campaign for more resources from central government. Now, we've seen that running over the last 6 months. It's a very difficult argument, and with Scotland devolving power in Wales, we're seeing that. So if the mayor is unsuccessful in that, then we may have to look at some form of additional tax-raising powers. And one opportunity is with the Transport White Paper in June, with the possibility of some form of congestion charging. And that, again, business is now becoming more open to recognising as a fact of life in the future.
Trevor Phillips, you also haven't thrown your hat in the ring, so I won't ask you that question. But do you feel the allocation of resources is currently fair?
No, I don't. I think it is pretty clear, and speaking as somebody who's covered London for nearly 20 years as a reporter, it's pretty clear that everybody else in the country imagines London to be this immensely wealthy, immensely well-resourced place. We all know, who live in London, that we have massive pockets of poverty here. We all know that we are losing 10 billion a year for lack of investment in our transport system. The formula by which public expenditure is distributed may well have been the right one 10, 15 years ago, but it does not reflect now the needs of this city. And the point that we've made in the past is that if we don't do that, it's not just London that loses, it's the whole of the United Kingdom.
Right. Now, Tony Travis, you've spent most of your lifetime studying, your academic lifetime anyway, studying these questions of London and taxation and so on. This would inevitably set up huge tensions within Britain, wouldn't it?
I think there is no doubt that this and the Scottish and Welsh reforms will raise the question of whether these parts of the country are getting a fair share. They'll all feel they're being badly done by. But there is no doubt evidence that at the moment London is paying more in tax than it gets back in public spending, and that debate will be that point will be made, and has already been made, by a number of people who are almost candidates, and they will make it again and again, because it's saying, let's have some of our money back, like Mrs. Thatcher in Europe, really. Let's have some of our money back and spend it here.
I don't want to put words into your mouth, but the implication of what you're saying is that the very existence of a mayor for London, a spokesman for London, will be likely to exacerbate whatever tensions exist.
Well, it slightly depends on how the mayor is given the power to raise resource. If the mayor were given a genuine, more effective power to raise money in London, then there'd be less need to say, let's have our money back from the other regions. And that crucially means that the government needs to move this debate on and give London a capacity to generate and raise its own resources.
Simon James.
Well, we take a very specific example of that. Forget central government. Why should not the people of London be allowed to raise a bond to pay for the tube? In almost every other city in the world, they can effectively borrow money against their own future revenue stream to pay for something they really badly want. We need in London Crossrail. It's an absolutely essential public transport project, which the central government has failed year after year after year to finance. I see no reason why, it's nothing to do with the rest of the country at all, I see no reason why the people of London should not be prepared to go out and say we would like to raise a bond, as in America, to pay for the tube.
Is that possible under the referendum?
No.
It's irrelevant then, isn't it?
But it's possible under the white paper. It's not under...
Okay. Nick Raynsford, there's a potential setting off of tremendous tensions here within the UK, isn't there?
I don't think we are. I think we are in the process of devolving power, as the Prime Minister said. That inevitably is going to result in a debate.
Fewer people live in Scotland. 2 million fewer people than live in London. And they're allowed to vary the rate of tax. You won't allow the Mayor of London to do anything similar.
What we are proposing is a framework which will ensure that the Mayor and the Assembly use the resources that are currently available to best effect, but also have the ability to explore new partnerships, new ways of raising finance for necessary projects. And they will undoubtedly be in daily discussion with government about projects that might require government support, because inevitably that's going to apply. This is part of a process of devolution. It will create a debate, a genuine debate, about democracy and how it works in a less centralized state than we have lived in the past. That's a very healthy thing.
Let's try and open this out a little bit by looking at the sort of qualities we would be expecting from a mayor. We're joined now from New York by David Dinkins, who was the last mayor of New York. What qualities do you think we ought to be looking for in a mayor here?
Well, first off, let me say that having been a mayor, I have some views on it, but I don't intend in any way to impose my views on the people of Great Britain.
No, I'm just asking the qualities, the character qualities you think we need.
Well, obviously you want someone who's honest and who has compassion. I say that the real question to me is whether or not you have a person who, as I think a mayor should, is a person who believes that we will one day be judged by how we treat the least among us, which means to me children and seniors and the disabled. Now, we have in New York City, as you know, a directly elected mayor, but candidates for mayor from time to time have varying philosophies. So it gets not to be so much what form of government you have, but as you put the question to me, what kind of person you have.
Now, would this person have to be a politician?
Oh, no. No, from time to time we've elected persons who were not politicians. But I don't think politician in and of itself is a dirty word. I think that politicians and politics is, to me, public service. There's some people who come to politics with a different agenda. But those who truly care about the people they serve are the kinds of persons that ought to be elected mayors.
Well, Richard Branson, you could do it then.
Maybe one day I could have a go, but at the moment my hands are quite full with businesses. But I mean, obviously, running London would be a fantastic challenge for anybody, and I think New York is a wonderful example where the mayor really has made a difference. I mean, if you went to New York 10 years ago, it was riddled with crime. If you go to New York today, they've done an enormous job in sorting things out.
The polls show you'd be the people's choice in many respects.
Well, there's 2 years to go, and I suspect it's very unlikely that I personally will run, but I'd love to work with whoever it is who is running and just put a few ideas forward.
Ken Livingstone, the slogan in the Labour Party is to stop you becoming the heir apparent, although all the polls seem to suggest that you're in that position precisely to do that. You are a candidate. What is the opportunity you think will be presented by being a directly elected mayor as opposed to being leader of the GLC and indirectly elected mayor effectively?
Well, I share all the concerns we've heard tonight about a too powerful person able to appoint virtually anybody without check. I would much prefer, say, the system in Paris where there was a powerful mayor in the form of Chirac, but he was elected by the parties on the council, and they could remove Chirac if he became corrupt or too abusive in his powers. And I haven't yet heard a convincing argument for importing the American system here, because it focuses on individuals, which is what we've already got in this debate that's been going on these last 6 months, rather than on the issues about how you tackle transport and why London can't vary its taxes, and why we can't have the same degree of independence in financial matters that the Scots are being given.
So, I mean, you would just reluctantly put yourself forward because it's the only option.
I know that people remember me. They know that I won't abuse the system.
Nick Raynsford, would you be happy to live with Ken Livingstone running London?
I've already said that the choice of the Labour candidate should be taken only after we have gone through the referendum, because if we don't get a yes vote, there won't be any candidate, and there's no point anyone putting themselves forward. I want to see a really capable Labour candidate who can look after the interests of London, who can speak for the whole community, who can bring people together, and who can really have a vision as to how our city can develop in the future.
But not Ken Livingstone.
And the party will.
Anyone
The
but
party
Ken,
will.
isn't it, in your book? Anyone but Ken.
The party will decide after the referendum if we get a yes vote.
Right. I just want to bring in Mayor Dinkins before we lose the satellite. Mayor, you know, the most notorious image we have of a mayor in this country is the image of Mayor Marion Barry in New York. Does it need in Washington? Sorry, does it need to be built so much around personalities?
No, it doesn't. Let me. I have a few things that I really ought to share with you. First of all, Marion Barry, whom I know, is totally irrelevant in this discussion. Number one, and you ought not look at Marion Barry in Washington D.C. First of all, Washington D.C. While they have a mayor who's directly elected, the mayor has very little power. The federal government supplies their revenue. They can't tax. They can't do anything. And right now they have an emergency control board that's taken over pretty much. So it's not really relevant to your discussion. It's important to keep in mind, if you're speaking about the city of New York, for instance, and many other cities in the United States, there's a sort of a balance of power. You have an executive, a mayor, you have a legislative branch, and you have the judiciary. And those three sort of provide what we refer to as a balance of power. There are times when the legislative branch and the executive disagree, and that resolution is had by the judiciary. Accountability is tremendously important in this discussion throughout. And while I have the floor, may I add that I think that term limits with respect to executives is essential. I'd say 2 terms. Some people think 3 terms.
Thank you. I don't know why you're nodding, Nick Raynsford. You're not proposing term limits.
He was expressing the anxieties that a term limit would result in the City Council in New York having only 8 members eligible to serve beyond the year 2001. And that obviously is a real problem if you simply debar people because they have served a couple of terms. Our view is that the electorate should decide whether people should continue to serve, not arbitrary rules.
I think the strong argument is if we at least get London government back, it will have its own momentum. The pressure for it to be a government that can raise its resources will be absolutely overwhelming. The pressure to increase its powers into areas that it doesn't have will be very strong. And the Prime Minister may think that he's giving London a new democratic government. He's going to have to give it much more power than he at the moment wishes to, and Londoners will want it to have that power.
Right. Well, that's it. The vote is next week. Until tomorrow, though, from all of us on Newsnight, good night.